Ethan Reed never imagined that taking a bullet for someone would lead him to discover a truth that would shatter everything he believed about the woman he'd sworn to protect. But on that rain-soaked September evening in Manhattan, as he threw himself in front of Isabella Crane, one of the most powerful business tycoons in America, his life changed in ways he could never have predicted. Before we begin the story, comment below with the city you're watching from. Enjoy the story, everyone. Ethan Reed had been in private security for 8 years. At 34, he'd protected diplomats, celebrities, tech moguls, and even a few politicians who'd rather their protection remain discreet. He was good at his job. 6'2", former Marine, trained in everything from tactical defense to threat assessment. But more importantly, he knew how to be invisible when he needed to be, and how to move with lethal efficiency when danger arose. The call from Sentinel Security came on a Tuesday morning. His supervisor, Marcus, didn't waste time with pleasantries. "We've got a high-profile client, Isabella Crane. You know who she is?" Ethan did. Everyone knew Isabella Crane. At 39, she was the CEO of Crane Industries, a tech and real estate empire worth over $20 billion. She'd built it from the ground up after inheriting a struggling manufacturing company from her father and transforming it into a powerhouse that dominated multiple sectors. Forbes had called her the Iron Tycoon. Business Insider had named her one of the most influential women in America. She was also notoriously difficult to work with. She'd gone through 7 security teams in 3 years. Why does she need new security? "Death threats," Marcus replied bluntly. "Someone's been sending her messages, detailed ones, about her schedule, her movements. The FBI is investigating, but she needs personal protection while they work the case." "And she agreed to have a bodyguard?" Marcus laughed without humor. "Not exactly, but her board of directors insisted. They can't afford to lose her right now. She's in the middle of a massive acquisition deal. You'll meet her tomorrow at her office. Try not to let her fire you in the first hour." The next morning, Ethan arrived at Crane Industries headquarters in Midtown Manhattan. The building was a steel and glass tower that seemed to pierce the sky, reflecting the morning sun like a beacon of power and wealth. Isabella Crane's executive assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Jennifer, escorted Ethan to the top floor. The elevator ride was silent, but Ethan could feel Jennifer's assessing gaze. "Ms. Crane doesn't like bodyguards," Jennifer said as they approached the corner office. "She thinks they're invasive and unnecessary. So if you want to last more than a day, I'd suggest staying out of her way as much as possible while still doing your job." "Noted," Ethan replied. Jennifer knocked once, then opened the door to an office that was all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. Behind a massive glass desk sat Isabella Crane. She was stunning in person. Ethan had seen photos, of course, but they didn't capture the intensity of her presence. She had sharp features, high cheekbones, and dark hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. Her suit was impeccably tailored, navy blue with a crisp white shirt. But it was her eyes that struck him most. Dark brown, intelligent, and currently filled with annoyance. "Ms. Crane, this is Ethan Reed from Sentinel Security," Jennifer said. Isabella didn't stand. She barely looked up from the document she was reading. "I told the board I don't need a babysitter." "I'm not a babysitter, ma'am," Ethan said calmly. "I'm a security specialist with 8 years of experience protecting high-value targets." Isabella's eyes finally met his, sharp and assessing. "High-value targets? Is that what I am to you? You're a client who's receiving credible death threats. That makes you someone who needs protection, whether you like it or not." For a moment, something flickered in Isabella's expression. Surprise, maybe, or respect. Most people didn't speak to her so directly. "Fine," she said, returning her attention to her document. "But stay out of my way. I have a meeting in 10 minutes, then lunch with investors, then a site visit in Brooklyn. Keep up or get left behind." "Yes, ma'am." The first day was grueling. Isabella moved through her schedule with relentless efficiency, barely pausing between meetings. Ethan shadowed her, always 3 steps behind, scanning crowds, checking exits, assessing potential threats. She didn't acknowledge him once, except to occasionally shoot him irritated glances when he positioned himself too close. By evening, when they finally returned to her penthouse apartment in Tribeca, Ethan was exhausted, though he'd never show it. Isabella walked through her front door and immediately kicked off her heels, letting out a small sigh of relief that was startlingly human compared to her Ice Queen demeanor all day. "You can leave," she said, without looking at him. "I'll be fine here." "I'm stationed outside your door for the night shift," Ethan replied. "My partner will take over at 6 a.m. Isabella turned, her eyes flashing with irritation. "You're going to stand outside my door all night? That's ridiculous." "It's protocol, Ms. Crane. You have threats against your life. We take that seriously, even if you don't." "I take them seriously," Isabella snapped. "I just don't think the solution is having a stranger hovering over me every second of every day. I'm not a stranger. I'm a professional trying to keep you alive." They stared at each other for a long moment. Finally, Isabella sighed. "Fine. Do what you need to do. But I don't want to see you before 7 a.m. Is that clear?" "Crystal." As the weeks passed, Ethan fell into the rhythm of Isabella's life. She was demanding, certainly, but he began to see past the cold exterior. She worked 14-hour days, took calls at midnight, and drove herself harder than anyone Ethan had ever protected. She was brilliant in negotiations, ruthless when necessary, but also surprisingly fair with her employees. And she was lonely. Ethan saw it in the quiet moments, when a call ended and she sat alone in her office, staring out at the city. When she declined yet another dinner invitation from friends because of work. When she ate lunch at her desk, alone, while her employees laughed together in the break room. Isabella Crane had built an empire, but she'd built it alone. One evening, about 3 weeks into the assignment, everything changed. Isabella was leaving a charity gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It was raining, a cold September downpour that sent most guests scrambling for cars and taxis. Ethan walked beside her, umbrella held over her head, scanning the street for the car he'd arranged. He saw the motion out of the corner of his eye, a figure emerging from between parked cars, arm raised, something metallic glinting in the streetlight. Gun. Ethan's training kicked in before conscious thought. He grabbed Isabella and spun, putting his body between her and the shooter just as the crack of gunfire split the night air. The impact hit his left shoulder, spinning him around. He felt the searing pain, felt his knees buckle, but his grip on Isabella never loosened. He pulled her down behind a parked car as more shots rang out, the bullets ricocheting off metal and stone. "Stay down," Ethan growled, his hand already on his own weapon. The shooter fired twice more, then disappeared into the rain and chaos. People were screaming, running in all directions. Ethan's shoulder was on fire, blood soaking through his shirt, but he didn't move from his position shielding Isabella until backup arrived. "Ethan!" Isabella's voice was shaking, her hands pressed against his shoulder, trying to stop the bleeding. "Ethan, you're hurt. Oh God, you're bleeding so much." "I'm fine," he managed, though the world was starting to tilt. "Are you hurt? Did he hit you?" "No, I'm fine. You saved me." Her hands were covered in his blood, her eyes wide with shock and fear. It was the first time Ethan had ever seen her lose her composure. "That's my job," Ethan said, and then the darkness took him. He woke up in a hospital room, pain radiating through his shoulder. The bullet had gone clean through, the doctors told him. He was lucky. It had missed major arteries. He'd need physical therapy, but he'd recover fully. Isabella was there when he woke up. She sat in a chair beside his bed, still wearing her evening gown from the gala, though it was now stained with his blood. Her perfect hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared. She looked exhausted and scared, and more human than he'd ever seen her. "You're awake," she said softly. "How long was I out?" 5 hours. They had to do surgery to repair some damage." Her voice cracked slightly. "Ethan, you took a bullet for me. You threw yourself in front of a gun." "That's what you pay me for," Ethan said, trying for humor despite the pain. "No," Isabella said firmly. I pay you to protect me, not to die for me. I didn't die. You could have. She stood up, pacing to the window. The bullet was aimed at my head, Ethan. The police showed me the trajectory. If you hadn't moved when you did, if you hadn't put yourself between me and that gun. She turned to face him, tears in her eyes. You saved my life. Did they catch the shooter? Not yet. The FBI is working on it. But Ethan. She moved back to his bedside, sitting down carefully. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Okay. Why did you do it? Not because of your job. I saw your face right before it happened. You didn't think, you didn't calculate. You just moved. Why? Ethan was quiet for a moment, examining the question and his own motivations. Finally, he said, because somewhere along the way, this stopped being just a job. You're not just a client anymore, Isabella. I care about what happens to you, as a person. Something shifted in Isabella's expression. The vulnerability she'd shown since the shooting deepened, became something more complex. I shouldn't have said that, Ethan added quickly. That was unprofessional. I'm sorry. Don't apologize, Isabella said softly. She reached out and took his hand, his right hand, the one that wasn't attached to the injured shoulder. Don't apologize for caring about whether I live or die. They sat like that for a long moment, hands linked, something unspoken but powerful passing between them. Finally, Isabella cleared her throat. I should let you rest. The doctors said you need to stay here for a few days. I've arranged for the best rehabilitation team in the city for when you're released. You don't have to do that. Yes, I do. You were hurt protecting me. It's the least I can do. She stood up, but didn't let go of his hand immediately. Get some rest, Ethan. I'll be back tomorrow. Isabella? She turned back. Be careful. Until they catch this guy, promise me you'll be careful. I promise, she said. And for the first time since he'd met her, she smiled at him, a real, genuine smile that transformed her entire face. The next 3 weeks were strange for both of them. Ethan recovered quickly, driven by the knowledge that Isabella was still in danger. His replacement bodyguard, a competent man named Rodriguez, kept him updated. But Ethan felt restless, unable to shake the feeling that he needed to be the one protecting her. Isabella visited him every day during his recovery. At first, she claimed it was just to check on his progress, to make sure the rehabilitation was going well. But soon, the visits became longer, more personal. They talked about things that had nothing to do with work or security. Childhood memories, favorite books, dreams they'd had before life got complicated. Ethan learned that Isabella had grown up poor in Queens, that her father had worked himself to death trying to save a failing factory, that she'd built her empire partly to honor his memory and partly to prove wrong every person who'd said she couldn't do it. Isabella learned that Ethan had joined the Marines to escape a difficult home situation, that he'd seen combat in Afghanistan, that he'd chosen private security because he was good at protecting people, but struggled with the killing that came with military service. You're not what I expected, Isabella admitted one afternoon, sitting beside his hospital bed during physical therapy. What did you expect? I don't know. Someone more mercenary, I guess. Someone who does this job for the money and the thrill, but you actually care about the people you protect. Not usually this much, Ethan admitted. Usually I can keep professional distance, but with you. He trailed off, unsure how to finish that sentence without crossing a line. With me? Isabella prompted, her eyes searching his face. With you, it's different. You're different. Isabella was quiet for a moment, her expression thoughtful. My therapist would say I have trust issues, that I push people away because I'm afraid of being vulnerable. You don't seem afraid of much. That's because I hide it well. She looked down at her hands. But you saw me that night, after the shooting. I was terrified, and for the first time in years I let someone see that. I let you see that. I'm glad you did, Ethan said. Being vulnerable isn't weakness, Isabella. It's human. She looked up at him, and Ethan saw something in her eyes that made his heart race. Want, need, hope, fear, all tangled together. Ethan, she began, but his phone buzzed, interrupting the moment. It was Rodriguez, his temporary replacement. "We've got a problem. The FBI just informed us that the death threats have escalated. We need you back, Reed. Ms. Crane specifically requested you." Ethan looked at Isabella, who was watching him with those intense eyes. "I'll be there tomorrow," he said into the phone, then ended the call. "You don't have to rush back," Isabella said. "You're still healing. I'm fine. And if you're in danger, I want to be the one protecting you." Something flickered across Isabella's face. Relief, maybe, or gratitude, or something deeper. Ethan returned to duty the next day, cleared by his doctor but still wearing a sling for his shoulder. The moment he stepped back into Isabella's office, he felt the shift in the air. They'd crossed some invisible line during his recovery, moved from professional distance to something more personal, more complicated. Isabella seemed to feel it too. She looked up when he entered, and for just a moment, her carefully controlled expression cracked, showing relief and something that looked almost like joy. "Welcome back," she said, her voice warm in a way it had never been before. "Good to be back. What's the threat situation?" Isabella's expression sobered. "The FBI traced the shooter. He's a hired gun, but they don't know who hired him yet. In the meantime, the threats have gotten more specific. Someone sent a package to my office yesterday with photos of me. Recent photos, taken without my knowledge." Ethan felt cold dread settle in his stomach. "Someone's been following you. Do you have the photos?" Isabella pulled out her phone, scrolling through images the FBI had sent her. Each photo showed her in different locations, leaving her apartment, at meetings, at the gym. The photographer had been close, too close, capturing intimate moments when she'd thought she was alone. "We need to change your routine," Ethan said immediately. "New routes to work, different times, different vehicles, and I'm staying closer. No more 3-step distance. I need to be within arm's reach at all times." "I can handle that," Isabella said. "After what happened, I don't mind you being close." The way she said it, the way her eyes met his, made it clear she wasn't just talking about security. The next few weeks were intense. Ethan stayed glued to Isabella's side, hyper-aware of every person who came near her, every vehicle that followed too long, every shadow that moved wrong. The FBI was making progress, tracking financial records and communications, but they still didn't have a name. The proximity changed things between Ethan and Isabella. They couldn't avoid each other, couldn't maintain the professional boundaries that had existed before the shooting. Small touches became frequent, his hand on her back guiding her through crowds, her fingers brushing his arm to get his attention. Long conversations happened in the back of cars, in quiet moments between meetings, in the early morning hours when Isabella couldn't sleep, and found Ethan on guard outside her apartment door. One night, about 2 months after the shooting, Isabella invited him inside. It was late, past midnight. She'd been working on a presentation for an important board meeting, and Ethan had been stationed outside her home office, listening to her type and occasionally curse at her computer. The door opened, and Isabella stood there, barefoot now, her hair down from its usual severe style. She looked younger like this, softer. "I made coffee," she said. "Want some?" "I'm on duty," Ethan replied automatically. "Ethan, you've been on duty for 12 hours straight. 5 minutes of coffee won't compromise my security." He followed her to the kitchen, a space of marble and stainless steel that somehow felt warm in the low lighting. Isabella poured 2 cups, and they sat at the kitchen island, the silence comfortable in a way it had never been before. "Can I ask you something?" Isabella said after a moment. "Always, or do you ever regret it? Taking this job, I mean. Dealing with someone as difficult as me." "You're not difficult," Ethan said. "You're driven. There's a difference." Isabella smiled, but it was sad around the edges. "I've been told I'm too driven, that I care more about my work than people. My ex-husband said it was why our marriage failed." Ethan hadn't known she'd been married. She never wore a ring, never mentioned a spouse. "How long were you married?" 3 years. "We divorced 5 years ago. He said I was married to my company, not to him. And he was probably right. She stared into her coffee cup. I've built this incredible empire, but I've done it by sacrificing everything else. Friendships, relationships, any kind of normal life. Sometimes I wonder if it was worth it. Do you think it was? Isabella was quiet for a long moment. I used to think so. But lately, she looked up at him, her eyes vulnerable in a way he'd only seen once before. On that rain-soaked street when he'd been bleeding and she'd been terrified. Lately, I've been questioning everything. What changed? Ethan asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. You, Isabella said simply. You changed things. You made me realize that I've been hiding behind my work, using it as an excuse to not let anyone get close. Because getting close means being vulnerable, and being vulnerable means potentially getting hurt. Isabella, let me finish, she interrupted gently. When I saw you get shot, when I thought you might die because of me, it broke something open inside me. All these walls I've built up, all these defenses, they didn't matter in that moment. All that mattered was that you were hurt and I couldn't fix it. She took a shaky breath. And then, during your recovery, when you let me visit, when we talked about real things instead of just business and security protocols, I realized I've been lying to myself for years. I'm not happy. I'm successful. I'm powerful. I'm rich. But I'm not happy. Ethan reached across the counter and took her hand. What would make you happy, Isabella? She looked at their joined hands, then back up at his face. This. Sitting here at midnight drinking coffee with someone who sees me as more than just the Iron Tycoon. Someone who jumped in front of a bullet for me not because it was his job, but because he cared whether I lived or died. The air between them felt electric, charged with everything they'd both been holding back. Ethan knew he should maintain professional distance, should remember that she was his client and he was her employee. But in that moment, none of that mattered. Isabella, he said quietly, if I kiss you right now, I'll probably get fired. Then I guess it's a good thing I'm the one who decides whether you get fired or not, Isabella replied, and then she leaned across the counter and kissed him. It was soft at first, tentative, both of them testing the waters of this new territory. But then Isabella's hand came up to cup his face, and Ethan deepened the kiss, pouring into it all the fear and relief and desire he'd been suppressing for weeks. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Isabella's eyes were shining. That was probably a mistake, Ethan said, though he didn't sound convinced. Probably, Isabella agreed, but I don't care. I'm tired of being careful, Ethan. I'm tired of pushing everyone away. I don't want to push you away. I'm not going anywhere, Ethan promised. Whether you're my client or whatever this is, I'm not going anywhere. They spent that night talking, sitting in her kitchen until dawn broke over Manhattan. They didn't kiss again. Both of them seemed to understand that what was building between them needed to go slow, needed to be built on more than just attraction and adrenaline. But something had fundamentally shifted. They'd crossed a line, and there was no going back. The FBI finally identified the person behind the threats 3 days later. Ethan was with Isabella at a construction site in Queens when the call came through. Agent Morrison, the lead investigator, delivered the news that would turn everything upside down. We've traced the payments to the shooter and the stalker. They both lead back to the same source. Ms. Crane, are you familiar with a company called Meridian Holdings? Isabella's face went white. Yes, it's one of my competitors. We've been in a hostile bidding war for a property development in Brooklyn. But they wouldn't. It's not the company itself, Agent Morrison interrupted. It's the CEO, Robert Chen. He's been funding the threats, trying to either scare you into backing out of the deal or eliminate you entirely. Isabella's hand gripped the phone so tight her knuckles went white. Robert Chen. I know him. We've done business together. He seemed professional, ethical. Financial desperation makes people do desperate things. He's heavily in debt, Ms. Crane. This development deal would either save his company or destroy it. And you're the only thing standing in his way. After the call ended, Isabella stood in silence, staring out at the construction site without really seeing it. Ethan watched her carefully, seeing the wheels turning in her mind. "He tried to have me killed," Isabella said finally, her voice hollow. "Over a business deal. He hired someone to shoot me over money." "He'll go to prison," Ethan said. "Agent Morrison said they have enough evidence to arrest him tonight. That doesn't change what he did. It doesn't change that someone hated me enough over business to want me dead." Isabella turned to face him, and Ethan saw tears in her eyes for the second time since he'd known her. "Is this who I've become? Someone people want to kill because of corporate rivalries?" "Isabella, this isn't your fault." "Isn't it?" She laughed bitterly. "I've spent 15 years building this empire, crushing competitors, doing whatever it takes to win. Maybe I deserve this." "Don't say that. You built your company fairly. You didn't do anything wrong." "Didn't I? How many businesses have I destroyed? How many people have lost their jobs because I outmaneuvered their companies? I always told myself it was just business, that personal feelings didn't matter. But they do matter. They matter to the people whose lives I've affected." Ethan stepped closer, taking her shoulders gently. "Look at me. You are not responsible for someone else's choice to commit murder. You did not make Robert Chen hire that shooter. He did that on his own, out of his own desperation and greed." Isabella searched his face, looking for truth in his words. "How do you not hate me? How do you not see me as just another ruthless businesswoman?" "Because I see all of you," Ethan said. "Not just the CEO, not just the Iron Tycoon. I see the woman who works 14-hour days because she's trying to honor her father's memory. I see the person who's lonely and scared but won't admit it. I see the woman who kissed me in her kitchen at midnight and told me she was tired of pushing people away." Something broke in Isabella then. She collapsed against his chest, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Ethan held her, one hand stroking her hair, the other wrapped protectively around her waist. "I'm so tired," Isabella whispered against his shirt. "I'm so tired of being strong all the time, of always having to be perfect and unbreakable. I just want to be human for once." "Then be human," Ethan murmured. "You don't have to be strong right now. I'm strong enough for both of us." They stood like that for a long time, Isabella crying quietly, while Ethan held her, surrounded by the construction noise and chaos, but existing in their own private moment of vulnerability and truth. When Isabella finally pulled back, her eyes were red but clearer. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. For protecting me, for caring about me, for not judging me. Isabella, Ethan hesitated, then decided to say it. "I'm in love with you. I know I shouldn't be. I know it complicates everything. But I am. I love you." Isabella's breath caught. For a moment she just stared at him, processing his words. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face. The same genuine smile he'd seen in the hospital, but brighter, fuller. "I love you too," she said. "I didn't think I was capable of it anymore. But I love you, Ethan Reed." This time, when they kissed, it wasn't tentative or exploratory. It was full of promise and hope and the beginning of something real. Robert Chen was arrested that night. The news exploded across business media. Tech CEO arrested for attempted murder of rival. The story dominated headlines for weeks, with reporters dissecting every detail of the case. Isabella handled it with characteristic poise, giving measured statements to the press, while her legal team dealt with the fallout. But privately, with Ethan, she let herself process the emotional impact of knowing someone had wanted her dead. Ethan stayed by her side through all of it, no longer just as her bodyguard, but as her partner. They kept their relationship quiet at first, knowing that the media attention was already overwhelming. But eventually, word got out. Isabella Crane, the Iron Tycoon, was dating her bodyguard. The tabloids had a field day. "Billionaire falls for her protector," screamed one headline. "From bullets to romance, the love story that shocked Wall Street," declared another. Isabella hated it at first, the invasion of privacy, the speculation and gossip. But Ethan helped her see it differently. "Let them talk," he said one evening as they sat in her apartment, overlooking the Manhattan skyline. Let them see that you're human, that you're capable of love and vulnerability. Maybe it'll make you seem less intimidating to your competitors. Isabella laughed. I doubt it. But I see your point. She leaned against him, and Ethan wrapped his arm around her shoulders. It still amazed him sometimes how far they'd come from that first day in her office when she'd barely looked at him. Ethan, Isabella said after a while. Yeah? I'm thinking about making some changes. To my life, to how I run my company. I don't want to be the kind of person who works 14-hour days and has no time for anything else. I want balance. I want a life that includes you, includes time for us. I think that's good, Ethan said. But make sure you're doing it for you, not just for me. I am doing it for me, Isabella said, because for the first time in 15 years, I want something more than just professional success. I want to be happy, and you make me happy. Over the next year, Isabella slowly transformed her life. She delegated more responsibilities at work, hired a co-CEO to share the load, and started leaving the office at reasonable hours. She and Ethan moved in together to a new apartment in Brooklyn. Isabella's choice, saying she wanted somewhere that was theirs, not just hers. It wasn't always easy. Isabella struggled with letting go of control, with trusting others to make important decisions. And Ethan had to adjust to being more than just a protector, to being an equal partner in a relationship with someone as strong-willed as Isabella. But they worked through it, learning to communicate, to compromise, to support each other through the challenges. One evening, about 18 months after that rain-soaked night when Ethan had taken a bullet for her, they were cooking dinner together in their Brooklyn kitchen. It was a simple moment. Isabella chopping vegetables while Ethan stirred pasta sauce, music playing softly in the background. I have something for you, Ethan said, turning off the stove and reaching into his pocket. Isabella looked up, curious. What is it? Ethan pulled out a small velvet box and got down on one knee. Isabella's eyes went wide, her hands flying to her mouth. Ethan, let me say this before I lose my nerve, Ethan interrupted with a smile. Isabella Crane, you're the strongest, most incredible woman I've ever met. You're brilliant and driven and sometimes infuriating, and I love every part of you. When I took that bullet, I did it because I couldn't imagine a world without you in it, and now I don't want to imagine a life that doesn't include waking up next to you every day. He opened the box, revealing a simple but elegant diamond ring. Will you marry me? Tears were streaming down Isabella's face, but she was smiling wider than Ethan had ever seen. Yes, she said, her voice choked with emotion. Yes, absolutely yes. Ethan stood and slipped the ring onto her finger, and then Isabella pulled him into a kiss that was deep and passionate, and full of all the love they'd built together. I never thought I'd have this, Isabella whispered against his lip. I thought I'd given up the chance at love and family when I chose my career. You didn't give up anything, Ethan said. You just hadn't found the right person yet, and neither had I. They got married 6 months later in a small private ceremony in upstate New York. Isabella wore a simple ivory dress, and Ethan wore a dark suit. Mrs. Chen, Ethan's former supervisor Marcus, and a few close friends attended. The ceremony was held in a garden overlooking a lake, with autumn leaves painting the world in gold and red. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, and Ethan kissed his new bride, Isabella felt something she hadn't felt in years. Complete happiness, without reservations, or fears, or walls. The months after their wedding were some of the happiest of their lives. Isabella continued to run Crane Industries, but with better balance, taking time for vacations with Ethan, for quiet weekends at home, for the small moments that make a life rich. Ethan transitioned out of active bodyguard work and into security consulting, advising companies on protection protocols. He was good at it, and it gave him flexibility to travel with Isabella when she needed to go abroad for business. One evening, about a year after their wedding, Isabella came home from the doctor with news that would change everything again. Ethan was in the living room when she walked in, and immediately noticed something different about her expression, a mix of excitement and nervousness that was unusual for someone usually so composed. Is everything okay? Ethan asked, standing up. Everything's perfect, Isabella said, a slow smile spreading across her face. Ethan, I'm pregnant. For a moment, Ethan just stared at her, processing the words. Then he crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. We're having a baby, he said, wonder in his voice. We're going to be parents. We are, Isabella confirmed, laughing and crying at the same time. Are you happy? Happy doesn't even begin to cover it, Ethan said, setting her down carefully and placing a hand on her still flat stomach. This is everything. That night, they lay in bed together, Ethan's hand resting protectively on Isabella's abdomen, both of them talking about the future, about nurseries and names, about whether the baby would have Isabella's dark eyes or Ethan's height, about the kind of parents they wanted to be. I want to be present, Isabella said softly. I don't want to be one of those parents who's always working, always absent. I want to actually be there for our child. You will be, Ethan assured her. We both will be. We'll figure it out together. The pregnancy wasn't easy. Isabella struggled with morning sickness and exhaustion, frustrated by her body's limitations when she was used to powering through anything. But Ethan was there every step of the way, taking care of her, attending every doctor's appointment, reading pregnancy books, and asking 1,000 questions. 8 months later, on a warm May evening, their daughter was born. They named her Catherine Grace Reed, Catherine after Isabella's mother, who'd passed away when Isabella was young, and Grace because Ethan said their daughter was a gift of grace in a life that had been hard-won. When the nurse placed the tiny, perfect baby in Isabella's arms, she wept. Not the silent, controlled tears she'd shed before, but open, joyful sobs that shook her whole body. She's beautiful, Isabella whispered, looking down at her daughter's small face. She's perfect. Ethan sat beside the hospital bed, one arm around Isabella, one finger held in Catherine's tiny grip. His own eyes were wet with tears. She looks like you, he said softly. She has your nose, Isabella replied with a watery laugh. They sat like that for a long time, the 3 of them, a family forged through bullets and threats, and the courage to be vulnerable with each other. In the years that followed, Isabella and Ethan built a life that balanced ambition with love, success with presence. Isabella remained CEO of Crane Industries, but she also made time for dance recitals and parent-teacher conferences. Ethan's security consulting business thrived, but he never missed putting Catherine to bed at night. Catherine grew into a bright, confident girl with her mother's intelligence and her father's protective nature. She loved both the business world her mother inhabited and the security protocols her father taught her. One evening, when Catherine was 5, she asked a question that would lead to an unexpected revelation. "Daddy," she said, sitting on Ethan's lap while he helped her with a puzzle, "how did you and Mommy meet?" Ethan glanced at Isabella, who was sitting nearby with a book. They'd always known this question would come eventually. "Well," Ethan began, "I was hired to protect your mother. She was in danger, and it was my job to keep her safe." Like a superhero. Catherine's eyes went wide. "Something like that," Ethan said with a smile. "And one night, someone tried to hurt your mother. I made sure they couldn't. You saved her." "I did. And then your mother saved me right back, by being brave enough to let me into her life." Catherine thought about this seriously. "I want to be brave like Mommy." "You already are, sweetheart," Isabella said, setting down her book and coming over to join them. She sat on the floor beside Ethan's chair, and Catherine immediately reached for her, creating a tangle of limbs and love. "Tell me the whole story," Catherine demanded. "How Daddy saved you." So they told her, a child-appropriate version, leaving out the bullets and blood, but keeping the truth of it. A man who cared enough to protect a woman, and a woman who learned to trust someone with her heart. Later that night, after Catherine was asleep, Isabella and Ethan stood in their daughter's doorway, watching her sleep. "I never thought I'd have this," Isabella said quietly. echoing words she'd spoken years before. I thought I'd chosen career over family, that it was too late for this kind of happiness. It's never too late, Ethan replied, pulling her close. We just had to find each other first. I'm glad you heard me screaming, Isabella said, then laughed at Ethan's confused expression. Not literally, but I was screaming, in my own way. Screaming for help, for connection, for someone to see past the walls I'd built. And you heard me. I'll always hear you, Ethan promised. I'll always be listening. They stood there together, watching their daughter sleep, surrounded by the life they'd built from protection and trust and love that had survived bullets and threats and the courage it takes to be vulnerable. Years later, when journalists asked Isabella Crane about her success, she always gave the same answer. I built an empire, yes, but my greatest achievement is the life I built with my husband and daughter. Because at the end of the day, love matters more than any business deal, any acquisition, any amount of money. The Iron Tycoon learned how to be human again, and that's the real victory. And when those same journalists asked Ethan Reed what it was like being married to one of the most powerful women in America, he smiled and said, "It's an honor, not because of her power or her wealth, but because she trusted me with her heart. That's the real privilege." Free. Their story became something of a legend. The bodyguard who took a bullet for his client, and the relationship that bloomed from that moment of sacrifice. But to them, it was never about the drama or the headlines. It was about two people who found each other in the midst of danger and fear, and chose to build something beautiful together. Catherine grew up knowing that love could be found in the most unexpected places. That strength didn't mean never being vulnerable. That success meant nothing without someone to share it with, and that sometimes the greatest act of courage is letting someone close enough to protect your heart. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Isabella and Ethan renewed their vows in the same garden where they'd first married. Catherine, now a teenager, stood beside them as they exchanged promises they'd already kept for over a decade. "I promise to keep shielding you," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not with my body, but with my love. Every day for the rest of our lives." "And I promise to keep trusting you," Isabella replied, tears in her eyes. "With my heart, with my fears, with all of me. Because you showed me that being vulnerable isn't weakness. It's the bravest thing we can do." They kissed as the sun set over the lake, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, while their daughter cheered and their friends applauded. That night, after the ceremony, Isabella found herself standing alone on the balcony of their hotel room, overlooking the same lake. The reception had been beautiful, intimate and full of laughter and love. But now, in the quiet, she found herself thinking about something that had been weighing on her mind for weeks. Ethan joined her, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders against the cool evening air. "You've been quiet tonight," he observed. "Everything okay?" Isabella leaned back against him, his arms coming around to hold her close. "I've been thinking about my phone," she said. "Your phone?" Ethan sounded confused. "The night you got shot. After they took you to the hospital, the police gave me your phone. It had fallen during the shooting, and I—" She paused, taking a breath. "I almost looked at it. I was so scared, Ethan. Scared you were going to die. Scared I'd never get to tell you how I felt. And I thought maybe if I looked at your phone, I'd understand you better. Learn something about you that I hadn't taken the time to ask." Ethan was quiet, listening. "But then I stopped myself," Isabella continued, "because I realized that if you survived, if we had a chance to build something real, I wanted to learn about you the right way. Not by invading your privacy, but by you choosing to share with me. And that decision, that moment of choosing to trust instead of control, it changed me." She turned in his arms to face him. "I've spent my whole life trying to control everything, trying to know every detail so I could never be surprised or hurt. But loving you has taught me that the best things in life require letting go of control, trusting someone else with the truth instead of trying to steal it." Ethan's eyes were shining in the moonlight. "I never knew you almost looked at my phone that night. What would you have done if I had? He considered the question seriously. I would have understood why. You were terrified and looking for answers, but I'm glad you didn't. Because you're right. Everything we built together was built on choices, on trust, on both of us deciding to be vulnerable instead of protected. What was on your phone that night? Isabella asked with a small smile. Anything scandalous? Ethan laughed. Just photos of you, actually. I'd been taking them for security purposes, documenting your routines, your schedule, but somewhere along the way, they stopped being just surveillance photos. They became, I don't know, ways to see you when you thought no one was watching. You smiling at something on your computer. You laughing on the phone. You being human instead of the Iron Tycoon. Isabella felt tears prick her eyes. You fell in love with me before the shooting, didn't you? I think I started falling the first week, Ethan admitted. But I didn't let myself acknowledge it until I was lying in that hospital bed and you were holding my hand. They stood together in the moonlight, the weight of 15 years of marriage and shared history between them. And Isabella thought about how differently her life could have turned out if Ethan hadn't been there that night, if he hadn't shielded her, if she'd never learned to trust. The next morning, Catherine knocked on their hotel room door, bouncing with teenage energy. Mum, Dad, I have something to show you. She pulled out her phone and showed them a video that had gone viral. Footage from their vow renewal ceremony the day before. Someone had recorded Ethan's promise to keep shielding Isabella, not with my body, but with my love, and it had spread across social media overnight. It has like 2 million views already, Catherine said excitedly. Everyone's talking about your love story. They're calling it the most romantic thing they've ever seen. Isabella and Ethan exchanged glances, both slightly uncomfortable with the attention, but also touched that their story resonated with so many people. But with the viral video came something unexpected. Over the next few days, Isabella started receiving messages, not threats this time, but letters. Hundreds of them from people sharing their own stories. A woman wrote about how she'd been too afraid to let anyone close after her divorce, but Isabella and Ethan's story had inspired her to try dating again. A young man talked about how he'd always thought being vulnerable was weakness, until he heard Ethan talk about protecting with love instead of just physical strength. A teenager shared how she'd learned from Catherine's parents that success didn't mean sacrificing relationships. One letter in particular caught Isabella's attention. It was from a woman named Sarah Martinez, a CEO of a mid-sized tech company. Dear Ms. Crane, the letter read, I've followed your career for years, admiring your strength and business acumen. But I also found myself becoming like you in the worst ways, isolated, afraid to trust, convinced that love was a luxury I couldn't afford. When I saw the video of your vow renewal, when I heard you talk about learning to trust with your heart, it broke something open in me. I've been alone for 10 years, and I didn't even realize how lonely I was until I saw what I was missing. Thank you for showing me that it's never too late to choose love over fear. Isabella read the letter to Ethan that night, her voice thick with emotion. I never thought about how my story might affect other people. I never thought about what it means to be visible in this way. You've always been visible, Ethan pointed out, as the Iron Tycoon, as a business leader. But now you're visible as a whole person. And that matters to people who've only seen one side of success. Inspired by the letters, Isabella made a decision. She reached out to Sarah Martinez and invited her to coffee. They met at a quiet cafe in Manhattan, and Sarah was nervous, clearly starstruck by Isabella's presence. But Isabella immediately put her at ease. I want to tell you something that never made it into any business profile, Isabella said. I almost died alone. Not from the bullet that was meant for me, but from the life I was living. I was so focused on being successful that I forgot to be happy. And if Ethan hadn't come into my life, if he hadn't shown me that love was worth the risk, I would have died eventually. Maybe not physically, but emotionally, never knowing what I was missing. Sarah listened, tears forming in her eyes. Don't wait as long as I did, Isabella continued. Don't wait for a near-death experience to realize that connection matters more than control. The bravest thing you can do isn't building an empire. It's letting someone see you without your armor on. That conversation led to more. Isabella started speaking publicly about the importance of work-life balance, about the cost of putting career above everything else, about the courage it takes to be vulnerable. She partnered with organizations supporting mental health for executives, talking openly about her own struggles with loneliness and isolation. Ethan, watching his wife use her platform to help others, fell in love with her all over again. This wasn't the Ice Queen who'd barely looked at him that first day in her office. This was someone who'd grown and changed, who'd learned to lead not just with power, but with humanity. One evening, about 6 months after the vow renewal, Catherine came home from school with news. She'd been accepted into a summer program for young women in business, and the program director had specifically mentioned that Isabella's recent speeches had inspired the curriculum changes. "They're teaching us that success isn't just about profit margins," Catherine explained excitedly. "It's about building sustainable businesses that value people as much as productivity. And they said you're the example of someone who proved you can be successful and human at the same time." Isabella felt a swell of pride, not in herself, but in her daughter. Catherine was growing up understanding something Isabella had taken 40 years to learn: that strength and vulnerability aren't opposites, they're partners. That night, as Isabella and Ethan lay in bed, she turned to him with a question. "Do you ever regret it, taking that bullet? It changed your whole life. You had to leave active security work, deal with chronic pain in your shoulder sometimes, adjust your entire career path." Ethan didn't hesitate. "Not for a single second. That bullet gave me everything that matters. You, Catherine, this life we've built. I'd take 100 bullets for this." "I wouldn't ask you to," Isabella said softly, "but I understand what you mean. If someone had told me that night that getting shot at would be the best thing that ever happened to me, I would have thought they were insane. But it was, because it cracked me open. It forced me to see what my life had become and what it could be instead." She paused, then added, "I kept something from that night, something I've never told you about." Ethan raised an eyebrow, curious. Isabella got up and went to her dresser, pulling out a small box from the back of a drawer. Inside was a piece of fabric, torn and stained with blood. "This is from your shirt," she said quietly. "The one you were wearing when you got shot. The hospital was going to throw it away, but I kept it. In those first hours, when I didn't know if you were going to survive, I held onto this like a talisman. It was the only piece of you I had, and I was terrified it was all I was going to get to keep." Ethan sat up, taking the fabric carefully. The bloodstain, his blood, had faded to a rusty brown, but the tear from the bullet was still visible. "I know it's morbid," Isabella continued, "but whenever I look at it, I remember what I could have lost. I remember why every day with you matters. Why I can't take this for granted." Ethan pulled her close, the fabric still clutched in his hand. "It's not morbid. It's a reminder of what we survived, of what we chose to build from that moment." They sat together in the quiet of their bedroom, holding the evidence of a night that had changed everything, and Isabella thought about all the moments that had followed: the midnight conversations, the first kiss in her kitchen, the proposal, the wedding, Catherine's birth. 15 years of choosing each other every single day. "I love you," she whispered. "I loved you then, when I was too scared to admit it. I love you now, when I'm not scared anymore. And I'll love you tomorrow, and every day after that." "I know," Ethan said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I've always known. From the moment you held my hand in that hospital room, I knew you loved me. You just needed time to say it out loud." The next morning, Isabella woke to find Catherine had made breakfast, a rare occurrence for their usually hurried teenager. They sat together as a family, eating pancakes and talking about nothing particularly important, and Isabella realized this was what happiness looked like. Not boardrooms and business deals, not power and prestige, just this: ordinary mornings with the people you love. "Thank you," she said suddenly, looking at both Ethan and Catherine. "For what?" Catherine asked, confused. "For saving me," Isabella said simply. "Both of you. for teaching me that the best life isn't the one you build alone, it's the one you share. It had started with a bullet, with a moment of split-second decision that changed everything. But it had become something so much more, a love story that proved that the best protection isn't just physical, it's emotional. That the bravest warriors are the ones who fight for love, not just safety. And that sometimes the greatest discoveries come not from looking outward at threats, but inward at our own hearts. But more than that, it had become a testament to the power of choosing vulnerability over control, trust over fear, and love over the walls we build to protect ourselves. Isabella had learned that being human wasn't weakness, it was the greatest strength of all. What do you think of Isabella and Ethan's story? Did they make the right choices? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to stay updated with all our stories. And make sure to check out more heartwarming and powerful stories by clicking here on the end screen. Thank you for being part of this journey with us.